Hello, everyone, and I hope you're all having a wonderful day. Today, we're going to discover the emotional story of a man who stayed awake all night, terrified of losing the woman he loves, while silently sacrificing everything just to stay by her side. What happened during that long, exhausting night changed both of their hearts forever. If you enjoy heartfelt and emotional stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. The heat from the long summer day still lingered heavily inside the small wooden house even after midnight. The old walls seemed to trap every trace of warmth from the brutal sun outside, making the air thick and difficult to breathe. In the dim yellow light hanging above the bamboo bed, Tu Diem lay curled beneath a thin blanket, trembling weakly while her forehead burned with terrifying heat. Her breathing came unevenly, shallow one moment and strained the next, as though every bit of strength inside her body had finally been drained away after working too long beneath the scorching weather. Sitting beside her, Toan could barely hide the panic spreading across his exhausted face. Every few seconds, he pressed his hand gently against her forehead, only to pull back again in fear because of how dangerously hot she felt. He hurried toward the kitchen, soaked another towel in cold water, then rushed back to her bedside with hurried footsteps echoing softly across the silent floor. But the towel barely stayed cool before warming again against her burning skin. "Tu Diem," he whispered quietly while adjusting the towel on her forehead. "Can you hear me?" Her lips moved weakly before a soft, trembling voice escaped. "Cold." That single word tightened his chest instantly. Even though her body was burning with fever, she continued shivering uncontrollably beneath the blanket. Toan quickly grabbed another blanket and wrapped it carefully around her shoulders, but her body still trembled from the chills running through her weakened body. Panic slowly consumed him. Again and again, he changed the towel. Again and again, he checked her temperature. Again and again, he called her name while silently praying she would answer him more clearly. Outside, the countryside had become completely silent, except for the distant sound of insects hidden in the darkness. Inside the room, only the sound of Tu Diem's weak breathing and Toan's restless movements filled the heavy silence. He had not rested even once since discovering her fever. His eyes were swollen and red from exhaustion, but he refused to leave her side for even a moment. Every time she whispered that she was cold, he leaned closer. Every time her body trembled, he pulled the blanket tighter around her. At one point, unable to watch her shiver like that any longer, Toan carefully lifted her into his arms and held her tightly against his chest, hoping his body warmth could somehow help her stop shaking. "It's okay," he whispered softly near her ear. "I'm here. Don't scare me like this." But deep inside, fear continued growing stronger every minute. For the first time in a long while, Toan felt completely helpless. There was no problem he could solve with hard work, no situation he could fix by staying calm. All he could do was sit beside the woman he loved and pray the fever would finally break before morning arrived. His eyes slowly drifted toward the small family altar standing quietly in the corner of the room. Without saying another word, Toan folded his hands together and lowered his head. He prayed silently. Not for money, not for success, not for work, only for Tu Diem to survive the night safely. Hours passed, painfully slowly. The towel kept drying because of the heat radiating from her fever. Sweat soaked her hair and dampened the pillow beneath her head. But Toan still hesitated to turn on the fan because he feared the cold air would make her shiver even harder. So instead, he stayed beside her through the entire night, watching every breath she took, as though looking away for even 1 second might somehow take her away from him forever. Finally, just before dawn, the darkness inside the room slowly softened. A faint line of morning sunlight slipped through the cracks in the old wooden wall and stretched quietly across the floorboards. Toan reached toward Tu Diem once again and gently touched her forehead with trembling fingers. This time, he froze. The fever had finally started to cool down. Not completely, but enough to make him release the first real breath he had taken all night. Relief immediately spread across his exhausted face. His shoulders lowered, as if the unbearable weight pressing on him for hours had finally loosened slightly. Tu Diem remained asleep, completely drained after the terrifying night, but her breathing had become steadier now. Small drops of sweat rested across her forehead, while loose strands of hair clung softly to her skin. Toan carefully adjusted the blanket lower so she could breathe more comfortably before quietly walking toward the kitchen. Soon, the small wooden house slowly filled with the soft sound of cooking. The warm scent of carrot and meat porridge spread gently through the air. Toan moved carefully around the kitchen, stirring the pot slowly while glancing toward the bedroom every few seconds. Even now, he could not fully relax. The fear from the night before still lingered inside him. While waiting for the porridge to finish cooking, his phone suddenly began ringing. The screen lit up with another call from the factory. Toan stared at it silently for a brief moment before finally answering. On the other end, Mr. Luyen sounded stressed. Deliveries were delayed. Workers were waiting for instructions. Several business partners had already begun asking questions about shipment schedules and production problems. Normally, Toan would have rushed to the factory before sunrise without hesitation. But today, everything felt different. "I can't come down today," he said quietly, while staring toward the room where Tu Diem was sleeping. A short silence followed on the other end of the call. Then Toan calmly continued giving instructions, asking Mr. Luyen to manage the factory for the day and pass information along to Miss Toan. Even though pressure from work continued building outside that small house, Toan had already made his decision. Right now, nothing mattered more than Tu Diem. After ending the call, he stood quietly in the yard for a moment, staring at the sunlight slowly rising above the trees. The morning air felt softer than the suffocating heat from the night before, but the worry inside his chest still refused to disappear completely. Not long after, Tu Diem slowly opened her eyes. Everything felt heavy. Her arms, her legs, even lifting her head, felt exhausting. The moment Toan noticed she was awake, he immediately walked back toward the bed. Relief appeared clearly across his tired face, though his eyes remained swollen and red from staying awake beside her all night. "Don't move too fast," he said gently. "You're still weak." Carefully, he helped her sit up against the bed before softly wiping her face with a towel. Then he turned the fan on at the lowest setting so she could cool down slightly without getting cold again. One of his hands remained behind her back the entire time, supporting her carefully as though he feared she might collapse again the moment he let go. Tu Diem looked at him weakly before quietly asking, "Why didn't you go to work today?" Toan smiled faintly, even though exhaustion was written all over his face. "I already told everyone I'm staying home today," he replied softly. Hearing that immediately filled her expression with guilt. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I made you worry all night, and now you even have to miss work because of me." Toan shook his head, while gently blowing on a spoonful of porridge before bringing it toward her lips. "You work too hard in this weather," he said quietly. "The heat outside right now is dangerous. If you keep pushing yourself like that, your body will collapse again." Tu Diem lowered her eyes silently. Only then did she finally notice how exhausted he truly looked. His eyes were bloodshot. His voice sounded weak from staying awake the entire night. Even his hands trembled slightly while holding the bowl of porridge. That sight made her chest ache with guilt even more deeply. The small room fell silent, except for the soft sound of the fan turning nearby. Then Toan looked at her again, his expression gentler this time. "When two people live together," he said quietly, "they take care of each other. So stop apologizing, okay?" The warm scent of porridge still lingered softly inside the small wooden house long after Tu Diem had finished eating, but the heaviness in her heart refused to fade. Sitting weakly against the bamboo bed, she quietly watched Toan move around the room while trying to hide how exhausted he truly was. He kept pretending everything was fine, pretending the sleepless night had not affected him, pretending his body was not close to collapsing from worry and exhaustion. But the truth was impossible to hide anymore. His eyes were still bloodshot from staying awake beside her until dawn, and every movement he made carried the slow heaviness of someone who had not rested even for a moment. Even so, he continued caring for her without complaint, checking her temperature every few minutes, adjusting the blanket carefully around her shoulders, and reminding her again and again not to force herself to move too much. Tu Diem lowered her eyes quietly each time he spoke, because the guilt inside her chest only grew heavier the more she realized how much he had sacrificed for her. While Toan stepped outside to feed the chickens and water the vegetables in the small garden, Tu Diem slowly pushed the blanket aside and carefully lowered her feet onto the floor. Her body still felt weak, but lying in bed while watching Toan carry every burden alone made her feel even worse. She steadied herself against the wooden wall and slowly stood up. The dizziness hit her immediately, forcing her to close her eyes for a moment before taking another step. Even so, she still tried walking toward the small table near the kitchen. Quietly, she began folding some clothes that had been left nearby, then wiped the table slowly with trembling hands. Sweat quickly formed along her forehead again, and her breathing became heavier after only a few minutes. But she continued trying to work because the guilt inside her heart felt stronger than the weakness inside her body. She did not want Toan to keep missing work because of her. She did not want him to keep worrying like this. She especially did not want to become someone standing in the way of his responsibilities and future. Outside, Toan had just finished watering the vegetables when he suddenly noticed how quiet the house had become. A strange feeling immediately tightened inside his chest. He quickly put down the watering bucket and hurried back inside. The moment he stepped through the doorway, his expression changed instantly. Tu Diem was standing beside the table, pale and unsteady, one hand gripping the edge tightly as though she might collapse at any second. Tu Diem. Toan rushed toward her immediately and caught her before her knees could give out completely. Her body felt frighteningly weak in his arms again, and panic flashed across his exhausted face, just like it had during the night before. "Why are you out of bed?" he asked, his voice sharper than usual, unable to hide the fear beneath it. Tu Diem lowered her eyes guiltily. "I just wanted to help a little," she whispered weakly. "You haven't rested at all." But Toan shook his head immediately, frustration and worry finally breaking through his calm expression. "You're still sick," he said more firmly this time. "Why are you trying to work already? Do you want the fever to come back again?" The seriousness in his voice surprised her. Normally, Toan rarely raised his voice or showed frustration toward her, but now the fear of losing her was making his emotions impossible to hide. He carefully helped her sit back down on the bed before kneeling in front of her to check if she was feeling dizzy again. His hands still trembled slightly while touching her forehead, as though he was terrified the fever might return at any moment. Seeing that only made Tu Diem's guilt grow even deeper. Quietly, she looked at him and noticed how tired he truly seemed beneath the calmness he was trying so hard to maintain. There were dark circles beneath his eyes now. His shoulders looked heavier than usual. Even his breathing sounded slower, drained after carrying worry through the entire night and morning. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, unable to stop herself. "I just didn't want to make things harder for you." Toan closed his eyes briefly before letting out a quiet sigh. Then, much more gently this time, he reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face. "You resting is already helping me," he said softly. "Right now, I don't care about anything else." Those words stayed in Tu Diem's mind, long after the room became quiet again. Later that afternoon, while she rested against the bed, Toan began bringing in the new sink he had purchased earlier. The metal surface reflected the sunlight coming through the doorway as he carefully measured the area beside the kitchen counter. Sweat soaked through his shirt almost immediately beneath the summer heat, but he continued working patiently, checking the height again and again as though every small detail mattered deeply to him. Tu Diem watched silently from the bed while he moved around the kitchen. At first, she thought he had simply bought the sink because the old one was damaged. But the longer she listened to him measuring distances and adjusting positions, the more she realized the truth. He was placing it higher so she would not need to bend her back too much while washing vegetables. He kept adjusting the space around it so she could stand more comfortably while cooking. He even talked quietly to himself about building another shelf nearby later so she would not have to carry heavy things across the kitchen anymore. Suddenly, something inside Tu Diem's chest tightened painfully. Toan was not only taking care of her while she was sick, he was quietly trying to change their entire daily life so she would suffer less in the future. That realization hit her harder than anything else that day. As evening slowly arrived, the small house became quiet once again. The heat outside softened slightly, while orange sunlight faded behind the distant trees. After making sure Tu Diem had taken her medicine, Toan finally sat beside the bed, with his phone in hand. Not long after, another call came from the factory. Thinking she was asleep, he stepped quietly outside the room and answered in a low voice. But Tu Diem was still awake. In the silence of the night, she could hear almost every word clearly. One of the business partners sounded frustrated about delayed shipments and unfinished work. Toan apologized calmly again and again, explaining that he still could not return to the factory yet because someone at home was seriously sick. Even through his exhaustion, he continued trying to solve every problem from a distance. Listening quietly from inside the room, Tu Diem slowly covered her mouth to stop herself from crying. For the first time, she fully understood how much pressure Toan was carrying while staying beside her. After the call ended, Toan returned quietly to the bedside. He probably intended to sit there only for a moment, but exhaustion finally overtook him completely. Within minutes, he had fallen asleep beside the bed, leaning against the wooden frame with his head lowered from fatigue. Tu Diem slowly turned toward him, her eyes filling with tears almost instantly. Even while sleeping, one of Tuan's hands still held tightly onto the edge of her blanket, as though some part of him was still afraid she might suddenly become sick again if he let go. That small, unconscious gesture broke her heart completely. She stared at his exhausted face for a long time while silent tears rolled down her cheeks. If I stay this week, she thought painfully, how much more will he have to sacrifice because of me? After collapsing from exhaustion and a dangerous fever caused by working under the brutal summer heat, Tu Diem spends an entire night fighting to recover while Toan stays beside her without sleeping for even a moment. Terrified of losing her, he changes cold towels again and again, holds her tightly whenever she shivers, and silently prays for her safety until morning finally arrives. Even as pressure from the factory continues building, Toan chooses to stay home and care for her instead of returning to work. But as Tu Diem slowly recovers, she begins noticing the exhaustion hidden behind his calm smile and realizes just how much he has sacrificed for her. While Toan quietly changes parts of their home to make her life easier, Tu Diem starts wondering if her illness is becoming a burden that could slowly destroy the man who loves her most.